So today I'd like to welcome Ben Gaa back to the Haiku podcast. Last year, Ben and I were talking about one of my personal bugbears.
Mhm.
I'm not too keen on haiku or senryu in which the poet is very obviously in the verse.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes it works, and I know practically all of our poetry, or rather in all of our poetry, we are very much present. For example, here's one of mine, which was recently published in the inaugural issue of Alan Summers' journal, Blue Outlier. North wind, in the middle of nowhere, roasted coffee beans. It's about one of my bike rides through the woods. And of course, I'm in the poem because, like, who else is going to be smelling the coffee beans? But I could have written something like North wind, in the middle of nowhere, I smell roasted coffee beans, which, well, I couldn't do that to myself because it's, like I said, one of my bugbears. I don't want to be in there. And I thought there's a quote from Michael Barabo, which says, "A haiku is like a finger pointing to the moon. If the finger is bejeweled, we no longer see the moon." And adding myself to the poem so obviously would just have hidden the moon. So, anyway, I don't want to preempt what you're going to say, Ben.
Mm.
Welcome. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
shut up. Well, I'll do my best to shut up, but we may well have a bit of a conversation.
Yeah,
And it's over to you. Let's
thank you
go.
very much. And I do agree with you 100% that, and I like that analogy of looking at have the bejeweled finger pointing at the moon. As soon as you see that you focus on the ring instead of what you're supposed to be looking at. And I think that is 100% true with haiku. And you can be present within your work, and you are present within your work by the kinds of things that you do and share. But the idea is, and let me share my screen. So I'm going to do some slides here. Okay, and let's see. Okay, so I've got removing yourself from haiku. So I think one of the things to think about when you're writing haiku is that this phrase I have up here. I've seen it in many different versions of this from a lot of different people and a lot of different introductions to anthologies and so on and so forth. But essentially is a haiku isn't complete until someone other than the poet reads it. And this is it's one of those things that's both obvious and not obvious, because when you're writing your poem, it's your poem, and it's something that you're putting out there and that you want to share with the world. But the unique thing that happens with a haiku is that it's not your truth. You're not telling your personal story. You're not talking about your own personal exact thing that happened in your life. You're sharing a moment. You're sharing a moment about what it is to be human living in this world and how we interact with the planet, the universe, what everything around us. And understanding that just because you're done with it on the page doesn't mean that the poem is complete. It's just a nice thing to have tucked away because somebody else has to read that poem. And when they enter that moment, the poem gets transferred to them. The moment gets transferred to them and it becomes their moment. Now, so a haiku poet needs to let go of their work and step in the background and get out of the way of the reader. And I often find myself thinking that I'm not done or I'm not doing my job as a haiku poet unless I'm not really present in the poem. So when you read one of my poems, hopefully you don't see me. And a little amusing story about that is that the first time I met Francine Banworth, who was editing Frog Pond at the time, which is the journal of the Haiku Society of America, the very first time she met me, she had envisioned me as this old retired Jewish man. And I met her, I was in my mid 30s, very, not at all what she expected me to look like. And she only built up that picture of me after having read multiple submissions of me over years. So it's just interesting to see, like that I obviously fooled her because you couldn't picture who I was based on the poems that I was submitting. So you need to let go of the poem, be in the background, and get out of the way of the reader. And so how do you do that? And really the way I think about doing that is is about how you use language within your haiku. And I think of haiku language, that there are three S's to haiku language. It's simple, it's succinct, and it's suggestive. And I've got a poem of mine, which is turning into like the Swiss Army knife of poems of mine that I like to use to talk about haiku and how it works, that I'm going to use here to kind of show how using language in that way and keeping the idea that my personal experience is in the background of the poem to help illustrate that because I'm in the background and I'm using the language in this way, that's why the poem works. And the poem is this, and you can find it in my book, Wishbones. A little frog on our sundial, passing time. Now, this poem is great illustration of haiku in general, because you can see the two images in the cut. Line number one is the first image, line number two is the second image, and then the third line ties them together. But if we also talk about how it uses language in simple, succinct, and suggestive ways, we can kind of showcase that by using language in that way, it automatically strips me out of the poem and allows the reader to fill in the extra details. So one, simple language. Now, if you look at this poem, there's nothing complicated about the language in the poem at all. Nothing fancy, no special tricks of swapping words around, no poetic tricks. It's very straightforward, very to the front. There's nothing footnoted, nothing to prevent you from reading the poem, to push you away from the poem. It's very simple. It's just a few words, obviously, and we're not talking about anything sort of really detailed and specific. It's very general. Now that goes into succinct language. So succinct language is getting just the right amount of description and detail of the poem to allow people to see what's going on. And then, so they know what they're looking at. So the first line is, the only description we have about the frog is that it's little. That's it. And there's absolutely no description about sundial. In fact, these things become suggestive things. Like the frog is a kigo, which designates a season. But the only thing you know about the frog is it's little. However, because you are approached with the first line is a little frog, you already have, your mind goes right to all of its image banks to figure out, what does a little frog look like to you? Now, it has nothing to do with my little frog. Me, as the person that actually saw this moment, experienced it, could have chosen to go a different way about this and be very detailed about the type of frog it is, talk about the type of sundial, put it in a specific place, but none of that is there. Instead, you have the reader figures out, well, I know what a frog looks like, and they can tell you in great detail about their little frog. Same thing with the sundial. The sundial, there's no description. So, you have to go into your own memory banks and figure out, well, what does a sundial look like? Is it brass? Is it ceramic? Is it terracotta? Is it on a pedestal? Is it on the ground? Is it on a wall? Is it in a park? Is it in, none of that is mentioned in the poem at all, but it's connected to a little frog. And again, we're relying on the reader to complete the poem. And ultimately, the poem itself is not about the frog specifically, or about the sundial specifically. It's about passing time.
Yeah.
And so you have to get, by using simple, suggestive, and succinct language, you're able to connect the moment, the feeling of passing time, which is what the little frog's doing, which is what's happening physically on the sundial, which is what the person experiencing the poem is doing by taking all this in. And it all wraps up in a way that you, as the reader, can go into great detail as to what's going on here, where this is taking place, what time of day it is, what the air feels like, what the scene feels like. And none of that has been provided by me, the poet. So if you would ask me, like, if you looked at this poem and you were saying, well, it was written by a retired Jewish man, Sure. Or it was written by a college age freshman girl. Okay. You know, from it doesn't matter. None of that matters. The moment matters. And that's the forefront. And what that's the important part about a haiku is it's what's the moment, what's happening, what does the reader see, what do they experience. And the moment you start to put in a little ring, like pointing at the moon, if I started to say some kind of specific tree frog or some specific toad or something like that, then the reader has to figure out, well, what does that look like? Do I know what that looks like? And it kind of takes some of the fun out of engaging with the poem.
Yeah, I think that's. I do like talking to you, Ben, because you often help me with something I've been working on, which which you've done again. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
But I mean, for all that you say, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're not in there. You could be that little old retired Jewish guy, or you could be the college freshman, or you could be, you know,
Mhm.
whatever. At the same time, you can see a poet, nondescript, but
Mhm.
there is a poet there somewhere. And I
Yes.
don't need to know it's you. I don't need to know that I am standing in my garden looking at the sundial
Mhm.
at the little frog and time is passing, or, you know, frog is passing time, which, great, thank you. Interruption over, carry on.
No, no. But that's exactly right. I mean, the thing is, the thing that we as poets need to do is we do the hard stuff to make this to make it look completely like this could be no other way to the reader. You know, there's a guitarist for the band U2, goes by the name of The Edge, and he often talks about when he's writing music, he likes, you know, when he seems to like guitar riffs come to him fully formed. It's like they've always been there and they're so obvious and that they could only go together a certain way. And I think that that's in a big way of how our poems must come across is that, I mean, looking at this, there's no place, there's no room to tweak or to twig. It's just as it is, and you experience it, and that's the poem. And we work hard to try to get that to make it look easy.
Yes. I was going to follow that up with a
Mhm.
question, but you've answered it really. You know, how do you arrive at this little poem? And it's really by hard work and practice.
Exactly. Yeah. I write a lot of bad poems. And in fact, this poem didn't have the word little in it at first when I thought it was done. And I was submitting it around and it wasn't getting picked up by anybody. And I really believed in this poem. I'm like, this is a good poem. I don't know why it's not getting picked up.
Mm.
And so for any kind of poem like that I submit that gets rejected, um, I revisit them. I keep looking at them and trying to figure out, well, what's missing? What's wrong? Why isn't this piece going somewhere? And it was the word little.
Yeah.
Without that word little in the first line, it's just a frog. It's very bland. It's very like, who cares about a frog? But
Yeah.
a little frog? Hmm. I can think of a little frog. I'm interested in a little frog. And it got picked up the very first time I submitted it after that. And yeah, and I read this, you know, if I go and do presentations or talks or whatever, and every time I read it, when I get to that third line, everybody there's like a collective smile or nods, and people are like, "Oh, I see what's going on there. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
passing time. I get it. Okay, wow." And yeah, now the idea of having yourself in a poem. I have two other examples that aren't mine. Um, this next piece, well, basically, the more you tie the poem to you, the less the moment belongs to the reader. However, here's one from Carolyn Hall that I really love, from her book, How to Paint the Finch's Song, which is one of those poems that when I first encountered it, it's just one of those, I just drop everything and just bow because it's just so amazing. And this one has the word I in it.
Mm.
And so it's Frost Moon, I tell my daughter the truth. Very powerful poem. I'm not a mother. I'm not a father. I don't have a daughter. I'm not a daughter, but I've had a mother and father. And it gets to what is the crux of what's going on in the poem here is that somebody close to you, it's somebody, one human that's close to another human, that has kept a secret. And at some point, at this particular moment, you make that I of the poem makes the decision to tell that other person the truth. And that's a universal thing that we've all experienced. The fact that the I and the daughter is just a suggestive language to say that there's a closeness of a relationship here.
Yeah.
It's not specific. And the key to make what makes this poem work is that we never know what it is that person's going to tell.
But don't you think because of the frost moon that it's something that the daughter is not gonna like necessarily?
Yes,
Yes.
I would agree. And that's the suggestiveness of the language. It's simple language, but it's suggesting, not telling us specifically, but it's suggesting that whatever this is, it's going to be cold, it's going to be difficult, because, and then followed by, I tell my daughter the truth, means you also think that, well, this is not like a split decision. This is not something recently that's happened. This is something that's fundamental. It's going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
And we've all been in that situation, whether we were the daughter or the I. And again, it uses simple, succinct, suggestive language to put us in this moment without telling us anything about what that truth is. We have to, as readers, bring our truth to that moment.
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, you see, I'm glad you brought it to my attention, because I think I would have passed that one over.
Because it said, I tell my daughter?
Yeah, because I get so annoyed by the I. But now, well, I've tried since our last conversation, to be honest, not to pass things over just because it's got the I in the poem. But like I said, I'm really pleased that you brought this one to my attention, because it is a really splendid piece of work, isn't it? Yeah.
But that's not to say, though, as an editor that reads tons of poems, that having those kind of hard rules isn't a bad thing for an editor.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think your own rules and guidelines are well served, because there are plenty of ways to write this poem and have it be really bad. Have it not work. And I'm sure you've seen them. I've written them myself.
Oh, I've written them. Don't worry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now I've got one last example, and this is a golden oldie. And I think that if you haven't come across this poem in some translation, you're going to get it now, which is this classic one by Busan, which I have from the Essential Haiku book by Robert Haas, which is the beautiful 6 words: I go, you stay, 2 autumns. And this is a poem that it's one of the first that I really read back before I gave my life over to haiku. It just blew my mind. One, that it was 6 words, and 2, like I remember exactly where I was when I was digesting this poem, and how it blew my mind. I was in college. I had a girlfriend, and we were parting ways in autumn to go home for spring break.
Okay.
And, and I thought, oh, sure, I go, you stay. This is the second year we're doing this. That's fine. But somewhere on the car ride home, it dawned on me that it wasn't just 2 autumns, 2 years in a row. I go with my autumn, you stay with you autumn. Wow.
Yeah.
It's like, holy cow. This is relativity. This is something that's like, we both as individuals have our own idea of what autumn is. And as we part, we're no longer sharing that autumn together. We now have our own separate autumns that we encounter. And, that's amazing. And I have no idea what Busan was thinking when he wrote this. It's many 100 years before I was born, in a completely different culture. Yeah. And yet this poem just rocks my world. It's just because he's not present, he's not telling me what the specifics are. I get to live those specifics. And that, to me, why this poem written so many years ago is still so relevant to me today, and so fresh, and still excites me, makes me want to write poems and experience these things.
And it's got your 3 S's. I mean, it's simple,
certainly.
Succinct, very, and suggestive, but it's it's very, very open to interpretation, isn't it, with this one? Very,
Yeah. Hmm.
which is something I do enjoy in haiku,
Yeah.
if I'm honest. Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
And that really wraps up everything I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, before you stop sharing,
Oh, okay. We
I
can put that
wanted
back
to go back. I think it was just before your Carolyn Hall
there. Hmm.
slide. There was a quote that you went to.
Yes, I think it's this one.
Yes,
Hmm.
I think I want to vote sort of uh, take a photo of that slide and have it as my background on my computer. You know, the more you tie the poem to you, the less the moment belongs to the reader. And I guess that's what we're aiming for.
Hmm.
It does belong to us, yes, but we're giving it to the reader. It's a present. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We as poets give that reader permission to take time out of their life to experience something.
Yeah.
And it may be something that they've experienced before in their past, in the present, and they get to re-enter that. It might be something they've never experienced before. It might be something that they're familiar with, but maybe didn't have never taken the time to stop and look at before.
Mm-hmm.
But we're giving them that gift. And if we do it right and do it well, they enter into that conversation, they enter into that moment, and they come out of it knowing a little bit more about what it is to be human.
No, that's super. Thank you again, as always, Ben,
Hmm.
for coming along and giving us this, or having a chat basically
Yeah.
with me. I've spent the afternoon doing what you were talking about during the presentation, just going back over a few poems, few verses that were rejected, and a bit like your little frog, I'm thinking, why? How dare you have rejected? How dare you have rejected that? That's a very good piece of work.
Mhm.
But I've been looking at it and just tweaking the words and playing with the words to see if I can make them like your little frog, you know,
Mhm.
just a bit less, maybe a bit less bland, possibly in some of the cases, and you know, hopefully they'll be better this time round, but we'll see. Um, yeah, but and there's one new one that I've been really working at, and the more I work at it, uh, the worse it seems to get. And
Yeah,
I,
that can happen. They can completely unravel. It just,
yeah,
that tightly knit weave just completely frays.
I know, but I'm going to go back because you've given me something there. Uh, the little frog has given me something to go back and inspire me with for my one. So I thank you. I thank you as always for coming along. And maybe you never know. Ben and I were having a chat at the beginning. It seems like we're both very fond of bike rides. Um, so maybe this year, if you don't come back on the Haiku podcast, we can have a bike ride in Missouri and see what we can come up with haiku wise as well.
Be interesting. Instead of a ginkgo walk, it's a ginkgo ride, a
Hey,
ginkgo pedal.
now you're talking.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Ben.
You're welcome. Thank you. And by the way, those listening out there, I just wanted to say that there's nothing better than getting that poem accepted by a journal because it's very validating. It's awesome. But there's also a lot to be learned on the poems that they don't pick. And it's always good to go back and look at those ones that didn't get picked, especially if you really like them, and you try to figure out, well, why? Because sometimes it just takes, in my case, adding that one word, and that poem is, it can't be any other way now.
No, it's true. It's a very valuable lesson. And you're sharing the podcast today with Alan Summers. He'll be telling us a little bit
Oh,
about
very cool.
yeah, he's going to tell us a bit about the Blue Outlier Journal that he started. And during the chat, I don't think it'll be on the podcast actually this time, but during the chat, we were talking about the editing process and
Hmm.
how that's almost as well. yeah, it's as important as writing the poem in the first place,
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, and many people don't see the value of the editing process. But as you said before, I think you said, what was it, that you write this, and when you've got the right words, it couldn't be any other way.
Hmm.
And you only get that by really working hard. I mean, okay, you might get lucky once in a while, and
Yes,
it
sure.
comes. But generally speaking, I was looking at my notebook today. It takes a wee bit of work to get it right. And I've started using your methodology now, where everything gets written out once and then completely differently for the next, I'm getting through notebooks like nobody's business.
Yeah, yeah, you do.
But it's valuable, because you can go back and you see, oh, that worked in that, and that worked in this version, and eventually, hopefully, you get the right version.
Hmm. And it's also like to get to those gift poems that come out perfectly right. You know,
Hmm.
you have to write like, I don't know what the number of how many bad ones it seems like you're working on before the other thing just plops out of the sky right in the middle of where you're trying to work on something else. It's like, where did you come from? I don't even know where this happened, but there it is, and it's perfect. But those don't just happen. You can't just, as a poet, just sit around all day and just think, oh, I'm just going to write one poem when I'm inspired, and that one poem, that one draft is going to be perfect.
Oh.
No, it doesn't work that way.
Cheers, Ben. Thanks a
Cheers.
lot.
You're welcome.